bitter wind blew in through her window, winding along her bare shoulders. Danielle rose from her chair and walked over to the window, slamming it shut. She peered into the blackness outside. Her house, being in and out of the way of the road, had no streetlights near it, and the only light in the forest came from within her home, for the heavy clouds covered the moon. She sighed and walked back to her computer. She leaned her head against her left hand and began browsing the web. She soon came to a website devoted to scary stories. She wasn't a big fan of scary stories, but she was bored out of her mind and figured a good scare might liven up the night. So she came across a story about the Slender Man. She read the story, and the ending sent shivers down her spine, but not as much as the picture that accompanied it. The tall man in the picture peered at her with its pale, blank face. She felt somewhat uncomfortable, as if the man was actually watching her. Soon enough, she forgot all about the tall man and continued browsing the web until she came to a site. The site seemed to be a gallery of men dressed in fireman outfits and the like, more modeling, showing off their chests and whatnot. She began to feel quite excited. Her parents were gone for the night, and the house was all to herself. She figured she might as well take advantage of the situation and enjoy herself. After 10 minutes, she finished up and slid down into her chair, feeling satisfied. Then she heard a knock at her window. She turned somewhat startled to see a tree branch swaying in the wind, lightly tapping her window. She hauled on her nightgown, then walked over. She didn't remember having a tree this close to her window and noticed the tree seemed to be more dark than any other. Its branches were black as night, and she reached over to feel it. She could feel heat radiating off of it. She snapped her head back and continued gazing at the tree until she closed her window again and began walking backwards into her room towards her computer. She turned to see her computer had turned off, and now the room was completely black. She looked again to the window as she made her way to the light switch, and saw the tree was gone. Startled, she frantically felt around the room until she felt something, a soft article of clothing. As she lay her hand against it, she could feel the heat like she had from the tree. She was very scared and could not say a word. She reached over to the wall with her other hand and found the light switch. The light illuminated the room, revealing that her hand was leaning against the crotch of a tall man's pants. She gasped as she drew her hand back and saw it was the Slender Man who was looking down at her, a 2-foot difference between them.
No!
She jumped back and winged an empty glass bottle of Coke at the Slender Man. The bottle struck it in the head, and it swung its long, lanky arms up to grab in pain. He fell against her bed, holding his head and sobbing.
Oh, I'm sorry. You just scared me, that's all,
she said with a sympathetic tone in her voice. She could not help but feel bad for the guy. His sobbing hit her heart with pity. The same pity you would feel when you're in an argument with someone and you make them cry and then instantly feel bad and apologize profusely. He looked up at her, a large red bump on his pale head where he had been hit. Regardless of his lack of face, she still felt she could make out a miserable expression on it. Danielle sat on the bed, and he leaned his head against her shoulder, still sobbing. She patted his head and slowly began shushing, trying to calm him down. He looked into her eyes, and she into his face. She felt such pity before, but suddenly she was incredibly aroused. She slowly leaned her head close to his and began kissing where his lips would be. He hauled off her white nightgown to reveal black lingerie. She pushed him onto his back and crawled over him, hauling off his black suit until nothing remained on his pale body besides a black pair of boxers and his black tie. He swung his long arms around and placed his hands on her ass. She yelled energetically as he gave a cheek a quick slap, then unbuckled her bra and threw it across the room. Her breasts swayed and hypnotized him. They continued making out until he stretched his arms across the room and into his pants pocket. He pulled out a small package. On it was a logo which simply had a circle with an X going through it. He peeled it open and revealed a small condom. He then pulled off his boxers, and what was within sent fear down Danielle's spine. Slenderman saw the fear in her eyes, and he grabbed it with one hand.
"It's so massive,"
she said while staring wide-eyed. Her jaw hung low in disbelief. Then suddenly, he spoke for the first time that night.
Anal.
A loud scream could be heard from within the house, followed to the sounds akin to a house being raided by the police as glass shattered, tables were knocked over, things were slammed against the door, and the legs of the bed were being snapped under the pressure. She woke the next morning, the bright sun shining through the window and onto her face. The window was open and black smudges left along the panes. She stood up and limped over to the computer. A black tie hung off the corner of her monitor and a small note left by the keyboard. It simply said,
I'd get checked out if I were you. Signed, Slim Slendy.